Now, the Edelman Trust Barometer 2024 classifies South Africa as a country of distrust. In the meantime, PwC's 8th South Africa Economic Outlook report for this year suggests that building societal trust can significantly improve South Africa's productivity and the prosperity of its people. Christie Viljoen, who's senior economist at PwC South Africa, joins us now with a greater perspective on the relationship between building trust and prosperity and how getting this right looks like for the local economy. Christie, a pleasure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Christie, often when we diagnose the South African economy, we speak of structural issues, we speak of infrastructure and the likes. Trust isn't something that comes up often. I'm keen to understand the relationship that we're seeing here.
I think the big challenge is trust is a bit of a softer concept. It's hard to physically put your hands on it. And if we in South Africa's context dig into trust, we have to go look at our history and the painful history that we have when it comes to a history of segregation, but also the current problems that we have with inequality, whether it's inequality in wealth, income, or access to services. So I think that's why trust is so under the radar maybe, and the point we try to make with this research is it needs to be focused on a lot more, and we try and emphasize the point that trust and economic development, economic prosperity are very closely aligned. If you look at just simple data points, but also the narratives in history over time, many of our most prosperous societies around the world have been built on communities and cultures of trust. So for us, that's why the emphasis is so important. If we are to thrive as a country, we need to build on these trust levels.
Christie, when we speak of trust, are we speaking here about the relationships that people have with one another? Is it relationships that people have with institutions, with government? How exactly are we taking stock of the issue of trust?
Again, why it's a bit of a softer concept is how do we measure this? You mentioned the Edelman information, which is a survey asking questions about, do you think people can be trusted? Do you think companies and government can be trusted to do the right thing? And I think in an economic perspective, as an economist, I'm thinking that concept about can we trust business as ordinary South Africans? Can we trust government, academia, NGOs, all these different sectors? We like to call them the social partners within our society. That's where the question comes in. And for us as a country to think about trust, it's easier to think about how we are almost damaging trust because we can make a long list. I mentioned inequality. We can think of crime and corruption as a challenge. Challenges we have with historical elements of race and culture and religion. So it is difficult. And I think we need a much more frank conversation within South Africa about trust. And I think maybe the new government, which represents a much broader part of society, is probably the best government in a long time to take this mantle and talk about trust.
Christie, I must ask, and I'm glad you mentioned the politics of the day. I believe that in South Africa, there have been people, forces that have intentionally driven mistrust because, certain people can take advantage of certain narratives and benefit from the lack of trust that we have with one another. And I'm wondering if then our issues with law enforcement and the lack of trust in that process is also, causing this huge distrust to really persist in society.
Well, I mean, it's not a far stretch to agree with what you've just said. We know that there's surveys out there. We know that the way that crime is reported, we recently had the latest crime statistics, the way crime is reported and the way it's not reported, people not going to the police, this information is well known. People have a challenge in trusting law enforcement, and we see it in many countries around the world. This is not unique to South Africa. But because we've got such a high crime rate in South Africa, it's a big, big problem. So I think if we look at just that as one thing, one element that we can improve upon, if we can look back 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, and we can say that somehow with action from within the entire scope of society, we've been able to improve trust in law enforcement, in the police, that would be a big win. It would make us for a safer society. It will make us more engaging with law enforcement. It's got positive knock-on effects. So that would, for me, be a wonderful green flag if we look back 5 years from now to say that's something that we achieved as a country. That'll be wonderful.
Another interesting thing to note here, Christie, is just how distrust is costly. It increases transaction costs, the costs of due diligence and the likes. I'm just keen to understand more on that one.
Well, if we trust each other and we go back to when business deals was just done with a handshake, that's quick, that's easy, it's done, we move on. Now we do have all kinds of legal requirements, but if we just think of a transaction, if I trust that you're going to fulfill your role, then we get on with our business. But if I don't, I'm going to have people that need to check up on you. I'm going to have to make sure that I remind you to do what you're part of it. I might even need to go into cost and legal proceedings to make sure that you do actually comply with the deal. We could have spent that time and money on something much more productive. So if there was more trust, we could have used our time and money in more productive ways. If there isn't trust, we need all of these processes. So it's relatively simple. If we do a deal and there's lots of trust, the transaction cost is just lower and we can spend that money somewhere else.
Another curious case here is the trust of airlines by South Africans. Let's talk about that one.
That was a part of a survey that we recently did around, for example, the trust in different industries. And we asked people, which industries do you trust the most? And airlines came up first. Hospitality was in second. And it basically comes down to people voicing their opinion. And so we had a thought about what might this be. And in South Africa, we've got a well-developed airline industry with high levels of quality of service, very professional. On-time arrivals and departures are also something they pride themselves on. So I think it might be a case of just South Africans having good experiences with airlines, and same with hospitality, where we try and do the best that we can within the global context. We want to benchmark ourselves when it comes to travel and tourism on the rest of the world. So we're trying to cater to international tourists. At the same time, we're giving a good service to local people as well. So that's sort of why I think people probably rated airlines as the one that they trust the most, because good quality of service as an example.
Christie, can mechanisms such as ESG, assist in the issue of the trust deficit we see in South Africa and I think at the world at large?
Well, we see ESG jumping up in a lot of business conversations. In this one, we're basically thinking of companies that focus on this environmental, social governance. If you measure that, and not just measure, but use it maybe as a tool to get yourself to improve on these numbers. If as a company you measure this and you can communicate it to your clients, to your staff, to your investors, it's a way of showing this is who we are, this is our impact on the economy, on society, on the environment. Let's be honest about what we're good at. Let's be honest about what we're bad at. That builds a level of trust because now people know what you're about. They know what you're doing to improve that. And immediately that sort of, again, it's a green flag. It shows people you are trying to do good, and there we've got shortfalls, you're actually doing something. So that's where ESG comes in. The measurement of those elements and communicating it to your stakeholders, that's building trust. They know more about you. That's a trusting relationship.
Well, Christie, always a pleasure hearing from you. Thank you so much for taking us through this one this afternoon. That was Christie Viljoen, Senior Manager of Strategy at PwC, and I think Senior Economist as well.